pleasure to have Catherine Topham Sly on the podcast today with me. Thank you so much for joining me, Catherine.
Thank you for having me, Nicole.
Yeah, I found you on Instagram actually, and I just felt this real sense of, I don't know, resonance, I suppose is the word. Someone who's pretty much doing what I'm doing, same kind of thing, counselling and couple therapy work. And I just really I got a really nice feel, and pretty much that was all I needed to sort of reach out and say, hey, do you want to chat? But I also really loved.
That's lovely to hear.
Yeah, I really loved what I saw on your feed around, really engaging with your community around getting them to tell you what was going on in their sex life and after kids and stuff. And I know you've got this workbook that you've developed, so we can talk a bit about that. But what I'd love is for you to maybe share where you're based and a little bit about yourself so that we can get to know you.
Yeah, cool. So we're on opposite sides of the planet, aren't we?
We are.
I'm in the UK on the south coast of England in a place called Brighton and Hove. And same as you, I work with individuals as well, and couples, and I do, but mostly focused around relationship stuff. I mean, I think most therapy sooner or later ends up being about relationships anyway, doesn't it?
I totally agree. Yeah.
So I do counselling and coaching, and I've got a special interest in the transition to parenthood. So that's something that I talk about a lot on Instagram, and then of course that's kind of become my niche, and I've worked more and more with clients who are in that phase of life, because it can be such a challenging transition. Absolutely. And I really don't think that we talk about it enough. So it was lovely to hear what you were saying about, engaging my audience around particularly about sex after kids, because I think relationships after kids generally is a bit of a taboo in our culture, but sex after kids, I mean, nobody talks about it.
It's so silent. So silent.
Which is so hard, because it's extremely common to struggle with it. It's so common that it's very, very rare not to. And yet it can feel so isolating if nobody's talking about it.
It's nearly easier for us to joke about it, isn't it? It's like, well, no one's getting sex. I don't know, you can nearly imagine it at the pub with the lads or with the girlfriends, but not actually really talking about it in a useful way, nearly.
Yeah, definitely. And there's something kind of implied in the joking about it, that it just is what it is, right? Yeah. And so
there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. Finding a way back together, that's something that isn't really talked about. Is there anything we can do about it? So it can leave people feeling pretty hopeless, I think.
I totally agree.
There's loads you can do about it.
Yeah, well, let's get into that. But I'd love to hear how this became a special interest for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, actually. I kind of did my journey, I think, a little bit in reverse, because so I've been with my husband for 18 years now. And when we'd been together for about 4 or 5 years, we went through a period of having quite a lot of conflict. And we really loved each other, and we really knew that we wanted to be together. But for us, the really difficult bit was making that transition of making the commitment and settling down. And we sort of knew that we both wanted to do it, but we weren't quite sure how we wanted to do it or when. And so we went through a phase of having, quite a lot of conflict. And we went and saw a couples counsellor at that point. So this was quite unusual for couples counselling. I mean, it's becoming a lot more common now, but at that point I must have been only about 23, whereas your sort of typical image of the couple that goes for counselling is kind of later down the line, sort of 40s, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm all for, please listen to this if you're 23 and come
do it.
At the first signs, it is so much more beneficial, and
yeah, I mean, the things that you learn and the changes that you make, they stay with you for life. So the sooner you do it, the longer you get the benefit.
And with any relationship as well, like,
yeah,
goes
definitely
on with that relationship. Yeah. Mm.
So
But
that, you know,
that was pretty wise then, going at 23. I
well, it
think.
was actually my husband's idea. He was the one.
Wow.
Yeah. No, we were,
Kudos.
you know, we were just rowing a lot, and you know, we went through a phase. We sort of, were we going to split, and he just said, I think that we should try and talk to someone. And I mean, we were both terrified. I remember it so well. The first time we went, we just like, neither of us eat anything before we went. We turned up there absolutely starving.
Scary.
2 hours after we would normally have our dinner because we were so nervous. But that therapy, we did 10 weeks, that completely changed my life.
Wow.
It was amazing. He was so brilliant. He was so funny. He was so light-hearted. It was nothing like what I feared it would be like. Really helped us to see that we could take it to completely different attitude to, you know, those kind of perpetual problems, the things that are just, they're not going to change, they're not going to go away. You know, still to this day, he likes to think that I'm messy. Of course, I'm not messy, not in my world. I don't think I'm messy at all. You know, these problems, they don't go away, but it's all about our attitude, isn't it? And about how we approach each other and how we see them. And you know, it changed my life in a big way because I worked out how to make a long-term relationship work in a way that I just don't think that I could have done it. I don't think I had the skill set or the attitude until I had what I think of as a kind of a bit of a training in it, you know?
Yeah.
And
I think we kind of need a training.
Yeah, I mean, why would we, unless you had, you know, amazing models when you were growing up, which I think most of us didn't, why would we know how to do long-term relationships?
Because most of our models haven't had any training. Like, everyone's just winging it.
It's the blind leading the blind, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you know, I thought, okay, maybe I could do that actually. That would be a pretty cool job. And a few years down the line, I got started.
That's so cool. What a great story.
Yeah, so we after that we got engaged quite soon after that, after we finished that therapy, and then we got married and we had a couple of kids. And then during those years, when we were having our children, I started my training. And so the transition when we had kids for us, you know, it was still tough. There was still a lot of stuff to work out. You know, there's still stuff to work out to this day. You know, particularly, you know, the stuff around the mental load and the division of the domestic labour. You know, I don't think that you sort that out and then you're done. And so, I mean, maybe, I don't know if I've ever met a couple that just happily sorted it out right at the beginning and now they're fine, you know, because things keep changing with kids, don't they?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So you know,
it's ongoing.
We work through these things.
Yeah.
But that couple therapy that we had then gave us amazing grounding. And when I see so many couples going through that transition and really, really struggling with it, you know, we had our struggles, but by that point we had learned what we needed to learn, I think, to have the right communication to get us through it, to keep turning back towards each other rather than away from each other. So I just wanted really to support couples in that particular phase, because I think there's something about my personality that I'm quite drawn to things that are a bit taboo. I think if nobody's talking about it enough, I've got a bit of a feeling of, we need to start a conversation.
We need to talk. Yeah, I really loved that about, you know, the stories and the questions you were asking, and the minute you got some feedback from someone in your community, you kept exploring that line. You know, so if they said, I'm not having sex now because my body's changed, you know, you really explored, okay, do you feel this too? And you'd get so much information and feedback there. It was great.
Yeah, I think people find it really, really comforting. Even just those tiny little polls that we put on Instagram stories, that it's just somebody tapping yes or no. You know, just to see, a whole bunch of people actually tapped yes, I struggle with this too.
Yeah.
Brings people a lot of comfort.
Yeah. So what is it that makes it so hard, do you reckon, this phase after having kids?
Well,
I mean,
right.
it's obviously there's no time.
Yeah, I mean, right from the start, it's such a shock, isn't it? I always think it's not really fair that you have to do that first year of looking after the baby and deal with the kind of complete fallout and identity shift at the same time. There should be a way that you can somehow not do them both at once. Obviously that's ridiculous, but you know what I mean?
It's like identity shift on a personal level. Like you might have been a career person or had interests or whatever, or friends, social life, being a party girl, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's personal, but it's also relationship identity shift. I mean, it's not even an identity shift, but it is. But it's that, like you say, it's that complete overhaul of systems and the load.
I mean, it's so different to look at the person who up until now was maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend, your husband or wife. You know, they were just for you, weren't they? They were your partner in crime. What you did most of the time was just try and have fun together. Yeah. And then suddenly you're looking at them and they're mom or dad. Like, what does that mean? And what ideas do you carry with you about what a mom is or what a dad is? And then, I mean, I remember actually saying to my husband, like, it sort of feels like actually we should have thought who would be the best business partner for me to do this with. Like, I was actually saying it to him in quite a nice way. Like, I'm quite glad that me and you work quite well as business partners.
Right.
But it doesn't always go that well, and it doesn't always feel like that.
But it's not all about how great they are in bed and how hot they are when you see them at the bar.
Exactly. And those are the things in the beginning. That's what we base relationships on right from the start, often, isn't it? It comes down to just, you know, how attractive do I find this person? Yeah. And then down the line, you find yourself having to make so many decisions, and they're all joint decisions. So in the beginning, you could be a bit more like, you do your thing and I'll do mine. But then once you've got a kid, it's like, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to feed this baby? Where's the baby going to sleep? Whose parents are going to come when? And you can't just, you do your thing and I'll do mine. You have to compromise. You have to find ways through. And that's when it starts to often highlight some mismatches in values, which can be really painful, because when we realize that someone we love has different values to us, even just slightly different, we can start questioning our own. We can start questioning whether they're right for us. You know, it's that really
doubt that makes things really tricky too, isn't it? It's like that little seed of doubt. But I just want to go back to what you were saying about not having considered them as mum or dad, and that does change things. Like, it's actually not something that I feel affected me all that much. Like, I don't know, when you did your polls, like, what percentage did you find were affected by that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put a number on it, but I would say that it isn't one of the more common problems,
right?
To really struggle with that. You know, lots of people do find that can be a very positive thing, to feel like, oh wow, this is so amazing. Like, you know, this now they're the mother or father of my child as well. You know, there's often a thing that it really adds something. I think it can depend a lot on kind of how the relationship was before, and like you mentioned, the you know, kind of seeing them as the hot person in the bar, and then the stuff that you carry with you. You know, I think some of us feel freer perhaps to integrate the idea of, you know, being a kind of mum by day and then there's someone kind of sexier by night. But some people struggle a lot more to integrate that. Yes. And, you know, for people who struggle to integrate that more, I think it can be really, really difficult, because it's a hard thing to talk about.
Yes. Also, when I was kind of reflecting, I don't feel like that was a big deal for me. What I did land on was, but if my husband ever calls me, you know how sometimes they're like, mummy's doing this, and if he ever calls me mummy, I like, something flicks inside me and I'm like, don't you dare. It just irks me in all all the wrong ways. Like, do not call me mummy. And that, I suppose, is about the same thing. It's like,
yeah, definitely,
I'm their mummy, but I ain't yours. Like, there's a
yes,
line.
100%. And that might be part of why it hasn't felt like too much of a trouble for you, because that line
Right,
is so clear to you and you've got that awareness of it.
Yes, that awareness in the line in disgust. Like, it's like, no, but I see other parents do that, like, quite happily, like, mummy, daddy, like, no.
Yeah.
So funny. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you were kind of in the middle of a flow, and I think I brought you back, but you were talking about the difficulties of this phase in relationships. Yeah, I think it's such a great niche, actually. It's very similar to my own niche. My niche is rekindling of long-term relationships, more specifically after kids, probably a bit later, actually. I'm like,
that's wonderful. That's such a great niche, because often I think in long-term relationships we can get to a place of maybe starting to accept things that we don't really want to, just thinking like, this is how it is, and feeling like the option at this point is like, just kind of live with this person and be okay with it, or split. So that's just such lovely work that you're doing to help people to see that you can fall in love again. You can have many honeymoons over the years.
Totally. Yeah. So many opportunities and so much you can do, I find, as well. So sorry, I interrupted you again. So yeah, and anything else you wanted to add to that kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the stresses of family life, isn't it? Because at the beginning, we've got the sleep deprivation and the recovery from childbirth and pregnancy and learning to feed, and the drop in sexual desire that often comes with hormones. So that can kind of make things take a big plunge. But then it's really hard to bring it back from there, because obviously then, you fall in love with your baby, you're dealing with this, like you were saying about, having so much less time. It's not just less time, is it? We have less privacy, less freedom, less money, and all the stresses that can bring with it. We're not getting as much sleep. It's harder to get as much conversation. We're getting interrupted all the time. It's very common for that to then lead into less feelings of closeness, intimacy, less touch, and then ultimately less sex. And the thing about having less sex is that if both partners are fine about it, then it's absolutely fine. But that's
very rarely the case.
It's a rare situation. Usually one or both partners is not happy about it, and it does tend to lead to emotional disconnection, because if one partner isn't happy about it, then what will quite often happen is either conflict over it, which can be so painful and upsetting, or turning away from each other, trying not to talk about it, trying not to face it, hoping it will go away or get better by itself.
And both are kind of the result of it being such a tricky topic, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to talk about. Most of us just don't have the language, really. And it's hard to talk about, because we need to kind of lean into our vulnerability in order to talk about all difficult stuff with our partners, but particularly around sex. I mean, sex is just such a vulnerable topic. And often the conversations that we need to have are around initiating sex and rejection. I mean, there's not much more vulnerable place than that, is there?
And this sort of pressure spiral that can be created from that one partner having a higher libido than the other, It's so tricky.
And I think often we can start to get a feeling that one partner has a higher libido than the other, when a lot of it is actually circumstantial. I mean, there usually is a bit of a mismatch in libido. It's rare to find two people who want exactly the same amount of sex. But because of the way that men, generally speaking, tend to experience desire more spontaneously, and women tend to experience it more responsively. So they tend, men, I'm obviously generalizing, this is not, doesn't apply to everyone at all, but generally speaking, men will tend to just find, they'll maybe see something that reminds them of something sexy, and then they'll find themselves thinking, oh, quite fancy a shag, that would be nice. Whereas for women, it's more common to only really want sex when things that they find sexy, like kissing and cuddling, are already happening. So often women will, particularly in this phase of life where they're looking after young children, if you've got a relatively traditional setup where she's doing more of the childcare, she'll be looking after the children, and she'll find herself kind of feeling tired, maybe resentful. And then what will happen is that dad will come home and he'll experience desire quite spontaneously. So he sees her and he thinks, oh, my lovely partner, I would just absolutely love to feel really connected with her right now by having sex with her. Yeah. And she responds to him like, seriously? Now? Like this? And will tend to just reject, because what she needs often is to feel that emotional connection first. And so she won't realize that what he's looking for is emotional connection, but he's trying to get there the best way that he knows how. Totally. And she'll think he just wants to get off, and it doesn't feel personal, it doesn't feel intimate, and she hasn't had what she needs in order to start wanting it, and she turns him away quite quickly. And this can create a really painful cycle, because if you seek emotional connection through sex, then being rejected, it means a lot more than not now, thanks. It can feel like you don't want to be close to me then.
And I feel like so much of this is, I love the way you described that cycle, actually. That I just feel like everyone listening is just going to be nodding along going, It's pretty familiar, right? But I feel like so much of that is, this is going to sound like a cliche, but is the patriarchy as well. It's like our Western sexuality, in again generalizing, is so masculinized in a way, and in a way it's like people are expected to have that kind of a sexuality, to see their partner and spontaneously erupt 100%. Into desire.
Because we live in a culture that thinks of whatever is the most common male experience as the default. So women are growing up in a world where they're experiencing themselves as other, and they're thinking the way that I am must be wrong because it's different. And then that definitely leads into it feeling really difficult for women then to start a conversation about what they actually need in order to want sex again. Totally. Because they just, we don't talk about this stuff enough. So it's not actually common knowledge that most women need a good 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer, of talking, holding, kissing, cuddling, whatever works for them, before,
preferably non-directly sexual.
Yes, exactly. Feeling that lovely intimacy. There's loads of exceptions, and there are exceptions even for individual women as well. So for lots of women, when they're early in a relationship, they don't need as much of this because there's something about that newness. And also for lots of women, there's a hormonal element of this as well. So many women might find that they experience spontaneous desire once or twice a month around the time that they're ovulating. The rest of the time, they need much more warming up. But because we don't talk about this stuff enough, if you don't know it, then how are you going to ask for it? All you think is, I don't really have much libido. You think, when he tries it on with me, I'm not interested.
And if you've already made yourself wrong already, it's very hard to, that's a very vulnerable place to ask from, isn't it?
And the other things that we need to ask for can be hard to ask for as well. So, particularly in that phase of life with kids, you know, we need time and space to do things that make us feel like ourselves again. It's really hard to make the switch from just giving, and, you know, being there in your tracksuit bottoms and your messy bun where you haven't washed your hair for a few days.
Not feeling all that sexy.
Yeah, to turn around to suddenly be like, oh yeah, now I'm feeling really sexy. You know, you need time to yourself. And the other thing that is a massive mood killer is resentment. So actually a sense of fairness, a more equal distribution of the tasks that need doing for the children in the home is one of the really important things that a lot of women need as well. But it gets into, you know, we need to be looking at these things from all angles in order to make the change that we need to start to feel sexual again.
Yeah.
And it's really, you know, it's really hard, isn't it? Because it's hard when you've been socialized to think of others' needs and you're spending your days meeting them, you know, to believe that we're worthy of asking for what we need. And then, like you were saying, to lean into that vulnerability to ask for it is hard, especially if there's been conflict around this stuff in the past.
Yeah, and there's so much hurt with the rejected party. And yeah, I mean, I was stuck in that cycle post kids. Actually, I really needed you then. You and your workbook probably would have done some great things. I ended up you really losing connection with my body, and my nervous system was not happy with me, and it became very stressful. You know, my husband would reach for me and I'd actually have anxiety. It can get quite bad, you know, and I have clients like in that state now where they just have to sort of really get boundaried and really know themselves and their yes and their no as a kind of for their own systems. But that can be really hard when there's still that hurt and that rejection and that pressure over there.
Yeah, and all the ideas that we're carrying about what it means to be a good mum, and you know, thinking that the answer to that is some kind of absolute selflessness, which of course it's not. It's not at all. It doesn't do our kids any good at all. You know, it's really, really important to be selfish. Like boundaries. I hate the fact that selfish is considered a negative term.
It's
I think
not
selfish it just should be a completely neutral term, because you know, of course there's toxic kinds of selfishness, but for the most part it's a very healthy thing to put yourself first. It's all about those boundaries that you mentioned.
So what do you recommend for women, say they're listening along and they're like, oh my god, that cycle, that's me, like what can I do?
Well, definitely check out my workbook because it takes you through all of this stuff. It gets you to do a really deep dive, you know, to really understand the patterns that I've just been talking about, and, you know, the challenge of going from being co-parents by day to lovers by night. And it's got bits in it about how you can take a mindful approach to sex, you know, to get yourself out of your head and back into your body, because that's another thing that happens, is that it can be so difficult when you're carrying the mental load and you've got that to-do list and you get in bed at night and you're just thinking about all the things that need sorting out for tomorrow and everything that the kids need, you know, to get back into your body and actually have really pleasurable sex. Can be a challenge, but we can do it through mindfulness.
It definitely doesn't happen up there in the rumination and in the to-do list, does it? It's
no, I mean, you're just completely disconnected from what's going on.
It's not going to be
when you're in that place, aren't you?
Yeah,
and it also includes a lot of stuff to help with starting a conversation around sex. One thing that I find on my Instagram that I get a lot of lovely feedback from is when I post examples of actually how to say things.
Yeah, right.
Because sometimes it can be so hard. So I put a whole bunch of examples in there. Because I think that probably is one of the top things that we do need to do around this to improve this situation, is to get more conversation going.
Yeah.
About it. And whether you can manage to do that as just the two of you, or whether you want to do that with the support of a therapist, just getting that conversation started.
I think that couples tend to either, like you said before, either shy away from this topic or just have conflict. Like, it's like they're so stressed about talking about it that they're doing the harsh startups, like Gottman says. That it's just like, bang, we're in conflict because it's this topic. It's like nearly like some wiring in their brain that takes them straight there or something. So it is.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to talk about gently.
Yeah, and I suppose that has to happen when they're calm. You know, like you've got there with maybe some scripts or some ideas of how to get into that type of conversation in a way that is not going to trigger their partner immediately and get them defensive.
Yeah, I mean, choosing your moment is so important, isn't it? So many rows can be avoided by just doing the quick check. First of all, is anybody in a really bad mood, or is anybody feeling insecure right now? And I think we can assume that anybody who's just been rejected is probably feeling pretty insecure.
Yes.
Doesn't leave you feeling great, does it?
So that wouldn't be a great moment for this kind of conversation, would it? No.
Yeah, so choosing your moment carefully is really important.
Yeah,
and then like you were saying about that kind of that soft startup, starting really gently, because I mean the Gottman research into that is incredible, isn't it? What is it? Is it 96% of conversations go on as they begin? I mean,
it's something like that, isn't it? It's nearly 100. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's hard to turn things around once it goes in that direction. You just think, oh, here we go again.
Yes. Yeah, I do like one of my favorites at the moment is, do you mind if I start that again? That's not a bad one.
Yeah,
because sometimes you don't realize the way it's coming out or something.
Yeah, I mean, we all do it all the time, don't we? Even people like you and me who help people with this stuff, certainly doesn't mean that you're a perfect communicator in your own marriage at all, does it?
Oh my goodness, let's just draw a line and highlight that one, because it's really easy to still be able to guide and help people, but when you're triggered in your own emotional stuff, very different story.
100%.
Yeah. No, I'm actually perfect. I never ever say anything terrible to my husband.
I'm sure you are, Nicole.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously sometimes things take a turn for the worse, don't they? And they get heated, and I think we have to be really aware of that and make sure that we take a break when it happens. Recognize that it is going to happen sometimes, but the worst thing we can do when we're both getting angry with each other or getting really stressed is to just carry on, to take that break. But make sure you come back to it and try and have a kind of you and me against the problem attitude.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Because I think there's something around this topic that it tends to become a thing of blaming. I don't know whether it's something about, particularly in heterosexual relationships, that kind of difference between men and women and how they're approaching it. But it does seem to lead down that finger pointing path, perhaps more than any other topic. Like, no, it's because of what you're doing or not doing.
Oh man, I feel like, I remember reading Esther Perel say that she reckons that homosexual couples do it really well because they're pretty much negotiating everything from the get-go. Everything's on the table.
There's no assumptions.
There's no assumptions, whereas we are like just walking down a path of assumptions and presumptions and shoulds and expectations.
Yeah, and so many of them are not even conscious, and that's part of the thing that's really hard about having kids, I think, is that you just don't realize until, because on some level you're carrying this idea of like, this is what a dad does, and then you have a kid and your partner does it differently or you do it differently, and you're like, but of course that's what a dad does. And they're like, that's not what a dad does. Dad does this. And you're like, no, but you're wrong. Both looking at each other like, how can you possibly think that? Because you've just been carrying this assumption all this time without, I mean, what else would bring it to light other than becoming a dad?
And you're so right. Like, there's no actual way of really testing for this, like, until you're there, unless you are. I mean, you can try and tease this out with communication, but I think even then, I mean, you're
it's
not going to cover
the
everything.
theory and the practice, isn't it?
So, exactly. And then without communicating about it, like, if you're not communicating, you're going to be building resentment, probably.
Yeah.
Or having a lot of conflict, I imagine, or who knows. Yeah. Very, very tricky.
It definitely comes out one way or another, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, you're just really helping me shine a light on this phase and the parenting, the early parenting days.
Yeah, it's a tough time, isn't it?
It's tough, and it's also so rewarding, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, it is. I mean, there's so many wonderful things about it. I always, sometimes I give talks about what to expect in the transition to pregnant people, and or couples who are expecting, and I always have to be very careful that I'm balancing it out, because obviously the reason I'm there is to help prepare them and to help them think ahead about some of the relationship challenges and what they might do about it. But you really don't want to say to people who are expecting, so this terrible thing might happen and this terrible thing might happen. So I always have to balance it out with lots of stuff about how wonderful it is, because it is. I mean, it's such an amazing thing to fall in love together with this third person. It's incredible
that you created.
And to have the opportunity, obviously sometimes there are those difficult bits about mismatches and values and expectations, but the bits where your values really match up and the bits where you manage to find a compromise that works for you both around that stuff, it's so lovely to be able to raise children, showing them your worldview and seeing how they react to it and what theirs is, and then readjusting it all and thinking, it's just so it expands your world so much, doesn't it?
It's
and
so expansive.
That experience with a partner that you love is incredible.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's like, it is actually the getting through those challenges, really, that like anything, make you stronger together. And
I mean, the connection it's so much deeper, isn't it, once you've resolved this kind of stuff.
Yeah, amazing. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us? I want to ask you a really self-indulgent question, but first I want to
I'm very curious about your question now, Nicole.
First, I want to just see if there's anything else you want to tell us about your workbook, or about the idea of this whole phase of parenting, of marriage, relationships after
I think there's probably just one other pattern that it would be really helpful to talk about, because I was thinking about what you said about people nodding along about that pattern around sex, and how comforting it is to hear, oh, this is a thing that happens, this isn't just us. And so there's another pattern that I find that when I talk about, people really respond to it. They find it very comforting, and it's also related because it's about how we deal with stress. And obviously becoming a parent is one of the very stressful things, but there's a lot of stress around having children and bringing them up, and there's stress around living through a global pandemic, isn't there,
oh my god,
to just play it down a little bit. And most couples are made up of two people who deal with stress differently, so there does tend to be one who seeks togetherness and one who seeks space when they feel under stress.
Yeah, such a good point.
Obviously you work with couples who are dealing with this kind of thing all the time, don't you? And generally it tends to be the woman who is the one who more seeks togetherness. There's obviously loads of couples where it runs the other way, and sometimes you get two togetherness seekers or two space seekers, but the very common dynamic is to have a woman who tends to be the one who brings up issues, and she wants to talk things through and work them out. Mm-hmm. And she can find her partner wanting space makes her feel quite anxious and abandoned, and sometimes try even harder to be heard, maybe even becoming critical. Mm-hmm. And her partner can quite often seem not that interested in talking about issues, or maybe like they don't take them seriously, but actually it's just because, you know, they get anxious too, but they tend to just want physical and emotional space. They don't want physical and emotional stress. They're responding to that stress by wanting space. And
yes,
you know, if this is a person who isn't that open at the best of times, under stress they might actually shut down. And this can create another one of those really painful patterns that it can feel very personal. You know, it's hard if you don't recognize that this is a coping mechanism for dealing with difficult times. It can be hard not to think like, oh, my partner is just so needy and demanding, or why do they have to be so emotionally unavailable? And to feel like it's a rejection of you in some way, or a criticism of you. So it's just another thing that I like to always make people aware of, that recognizing this pattern. And once you're aware that actually we're just both trying to cope with the difficult things that we're going through in life, then again, it becomes about communication, that you can talk about it. You can say, hey, do you think we might be doing that thing? Or, you know, actually, I just need to go and calm down for 20 minutes, but I'll come back and talk to you when I'm feeling better. You know, to be able to actually talk about our process rather than just acting it out is so useful, isn't it?
So nice, and such relief. Just the thought that this is how they cope with stress. This is not about me. Us. Just that, I think, is really powerful and helpful. And then I think it just allows this little crack of light in for a bit of compassion, a bit of empathy, a bit of deeper understanding of, hey, so what would help you here? Or
compassion is just so important, isn't it? And can often become, I think it gets, the more hurt we feel, the harder we find it to be compassionate, I think.
Absolutely, it's so true. And I think it's very hard as well if we find compassion hard for ourselves as well. Like we're often that's a whole other conversation though. So but it is related, isn't it? It's like if I can't be gentle with myself, I'm always harsh and the disciplinarian for myself, I'm going to be probably reflecting that.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate those cycles, and I really think that they are so relatable, and like you said, they're a generalization. They're the majority probably, but even if you're not in them, I think you can relate and find something that's maybe makes you feel like you're not entirely alone in what's going on. So super helpful.
Yeah, it's a big part of my motivation in doing, you know, this work online rather than just in the consulting room, is to really help people to feel less alone in this stuff.
Beautiful. Absolutely. So I will share with people where they can find you. But yes, my self-indulgent question, are you ready for it? I'm going to be publishing my book very shortly, and it's about it's not exactly about relationships, but it's very much it is, like many chapters are directly about relationships. It's called The Beauty Load, and it's like the mental load, but I feel like as women we feel the beauty load. We're constantly checking, am I pretty enough, am I enough? And
that's such a brilliant idea.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you about this because I saw some of your maybe feedback you had in your stories did
Mm-hmm.
come back to not feeling attractive after
Mm.
babies. My body has changed. I just don't feel as beautiful, therefore don't feel like sex. And I have a bit about this in my book, but I just wanted to, yeah, ask you what your
It's
thoughts were
tough,
about
isn't
that.
it?
Yeah.
Because we live in a really porn saturated culture, and like you say, a patriarchy. So we as women feel, you know, it's very clear to us from a young age we're the objects.
Yeah.
They're the subjects of the sexual, men are the subjects of the sexual story, and women are the
Yeah.
objects. And that can make women feel so much pressure to present ourselves in a certain way. And then your whole sex life can kind of revolve around your own sense of attractiveness. And it can start to feel like a performance that you need to look a certain way for, which is actually devastating to think of it only ever being that much. Because really what we're looking for with sex is an intimate, connecting experience. You know, we have sex because it feels good.
It's sensory.
Yeah, it's about being in our bodies and sharing that, having that connection, sharing that with your partner that you don't share with anybody else. And it's one thing that's really sad about it when women get into that situation is that, again, it's a bit of a vicious cycle, because if you don't have sex because you don't feel attractive enough, then you're missing out on one of the most wonderful things that sex gives to you, which is to really enjoy being in your body and feel that pleasure and enjoy the amazing thing of having the senses that we have and being able to enjoy that sensory experience that actually can in itself be quite healing of that kind of pain around your sense of your inadequacy of your own appearance. You know, actually feeling how wonderful, how much pleasure you can feel in your body can be one of the things that makes you feel good about your body again.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it like you say, it's kind of healing that objectification within,
It's a reclaiming, isn't it? Exactly.
reclaiming.
Coming
Yeah.
from within rather than looking from without.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really sad, actually.
Mm.
Yeah. Thank you. I really love that
Sounds.
perspective. But I noticed a lot of women on your polls were mentioning it. It is very common. I mean, I know it myself, like, you know, that post-baby body, you're like, who would want to have sex with this? Who would find this
Yeah.
attractive? You know, and we're just so, I don't know, programmed to think of slim and no extra chubbiness as attractive when
Yeah, that Western beauty ideal that now with the technology has become something that literally nobody actually looks like. It's literally not even real.
yeah. And like you said, it just kind of perpetuates this getting stuck in our head and not descending down into the body where the pleasure is. So.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that you kind of have to make a decision that you're not going to let it hold you back if you're going to heal from it, if you're going to get into having sex that feels good.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm not, you know, maybe this is going to make sex difficult for me, and maybe I'm going to have to do it in the dark, and I'm going to ask my partner not to touch me in certain places, and you know that there might be things that you need to do in order to feel safe enough, to emotionally safe enough to have sex, but that probably will be the first step on the path back to feeling okay about doing it again. That you know, the longer you avoid it, the situation isn't changing.
To back to that healing. So I'm kind of hearing you say it's extremely courageous. You know,
God, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's like a leap of faith in a way. It's like, let's see how this
Yeah.
goes.
And the other thing about it is not just the experiencing the physical pleasure, but also experiencing that loving connection with your partner and how much actually they do still massively enjoy having sex with you.
Yeah.
That can be healing as well. That, you know, as long as you
Yes.
keep holding back from doing it, then you're going to keep thinking that you're not attractive enough to do it. But once you do it and they have a great time too, then you think, oh, okay, actually, they do
Yeah.
still want to have sex with me.
I really thank you for your answer there. It's, I think, again, it's a relief to hear that other women think about this or
So
struggle
much.
with it, because
All
I
women,
think,
I think.
because when we don't share this stuff, I feel like we can really personalize it and go that it's because of the way I look or what's wrong with me. Thank you so much,
It's my
Catherine. I've
pleasure. Thank
really
you.
enjoyed chatting to you. I love making
Same here.
connections with people across the sea, the other
Yeah,
side of
it's
the
great,
world.
isn't it?
It's so much fun. So can you, I'm going to put things in the show notes for people to find you, but could you tell people where they could find you?
Yeah, that would be great. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I'm Insight and Connection.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then you can find links to the workbook and other resources in the link in my bio there.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful. That workbook does sound amazing. So yeah, I reckon everyone should go jump on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
exciting to start getting some feedback from people who've been having a look through it already. It's only been out a few days and I've already been hearing some great
Oh,
things. So it's really
wow.
exciting.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And some I think I read that you have some journal prompts there that could possibly be done as a couple as well, which I thought was a great idea.
Yeah, I wrote it, very deliberately so that you can work through it on your own or with a partner if you prefer, whatever you prefer.
Yeah.
Because, I know that starting these conversations can be difficult and there's a lot of private stuff going on. And often people want to just reflect on their own first and not feel, oh, this book's going to tell us that we have to do something that I don't want to do, or, there can be worries around that. But I think that once people have looked through it and worked through it on their own, they quite often will want to talk to their partners about quite a lot of it. Yeah, or going through and doing it together right from the start would be amazing too.
Yeah. Depends where you're at. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. And all the best with all your work, helping these.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't wait to see your book when it comes out. That's really exciting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.